We all know by now that Mike Johnson took a big fat L yesterday, but it is so much worse for him than you realize. So yeah, we know that Mike Johnson spent weeks and weeks and weeks trying to prevent this discharge petition around the Epstein files from being signed, right? He prevented duly elected Arizona Representative Adelita Grijalva from being sworn in for like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. It was all about the discharge petition. And so when she ultimately had to be sworn in, the discharge petition immediately signed. And then Mike Johnson is blustering about how it's not going to pass the House. The vote that comes to the floor is not going to pass the House. And then it passed. What was it? 427-1. And immediately after that happened, he came out and was like, oh, well, we're going to work on an amendment in the Senate. The Senate is going to, finagle. Like, it's not going to pass the Senate. And even if it does, it's going to be amended. No, even before it got to the Senate, it was passed by unanimous consent. Complete and total humiliation for Mike Johnson, who has decided to, Mike Johnson reminds me of like if Donald Trump is a big fat female anglerfish, Mike Johnson is that little parasitic male that has just like permanently affixed himself to Donald Trump. They are now utterly fused. There is no way for Mike Johnson to extricate himself from his attachment and association to Donald Trump. He has been Donald Trump's lapdog. And I mean, like the Speaker of the House is supposed to be representing the majority party in the House, be the leader of the majority party. But Mike Johnson has decided his role is to make sure that the House is completely non-functional so that Donald Trump can advance his authoritarian agenda. Like that's all that Mike Johnson has cared about. He's lied and lied and lied. He's made sure that the House is rarely in session and that they don't get anything done that Donald Trump doesn't desperately want to go forward. Mike Johnson has been Donald Trump's little lapdog, his little lackey in the House. And he's felt very big and powerful, despite the fact that he looks like a little Keebler elf. He's felt really big and powerful because he's been able to control the House pretty effectively thus far this year. Who knows what kind of threats and intimidation and strong arming have gone on behind the scenes to get House Republicans to basically allow themselves to become a fully cemented party of fascism. And House Republicans are not the only ones, right? Senate Republicans are as well. They are abandoning their duty to you, their constituents. They're abandoning their oath to the Constitution in order to be a fully consolidated party of fascism and do whatever Trump wants. And that's at the leadership, the behest of Mike Johnson. And so just what a crushing humiliation for him yesterday. Because his number one job for months and months and months has been to prevent the Epstein files from being released. Because they would implicate Daddy Donald, because they would be devastating for MAGA. And whatever happens to Donald Trump, Mike Johnson has linked his fate to Donald Trump's. But it's so much more than the humiliation around this discharge petition for Epstein. There was a second discharge petition that was signed yesterday as well, which is really pretty historic. I don't know of any other instance where 2 discharge petitions have been signed in one day. They're pretty rare to have signed at all, because a discharge petition being signed is essentially a humiliation of the Speaker. It is a repudiation of the Speaker. The Speaker won't let a piece of legislation come to the floor, even if the members want it. It is a way to get around the Speaker blocking duly elected representatives from doing their job. So when a discharge petition gets signed, it is a black mark on the Speaker. So to have the Epstein discharge petition go through, and then to also have, I'm going to read here from a press release from the AFL-CIO on November 17th, 2025. Labor movement achieves bipartisan majority, forces vote to restore federal workers' union rights. So this is about an executive order, I think actually a series of executive orders that Donald Trump signed. Fascists, billionaires, the Republican Party are very, very afraid of the labor movement, which is why it's been, and they work very hard to undermine the labor movement and the power of workers. They work to undermine workers' rights, which is why it's been so frustrating to see so many blue-collar folks, union folks, vote for Donald Trump. They are voting against their own best interest, against their own rights. Republicans have never been an ally to the working class, and they are very anti-union. They are opposed to you having fair pay, fair wages, good health care, safe working conditions. They are opposed to workers' rights. They're opposed to the labor movement. And yet, because so many blue-collar folks have voted Republican in the last several years, because they feel abandoned by corporate Democrats. And I've talked about that. We can talk about it some more at a later date. There are a number of Republicans who understand which side their bread is buttered on, and they know that they cannot piss off the union workers in their state. And they know that this executive order was really bad for them and for their constituents. And so not only did we have this bipartisan vote on the discharge petition around the Epstein files and then the subsequent overwhelming 427-1 vote, hugely overwhelmingly bipartisan, we also had this second discharge petition that got enough signatures. It was a bipartisan bill sponsored by Jared Golden, who is a Democrat from Maine, and Brian Fitzpatrick, who is a Republican from Pennsylvania. This discharge petition was about reversing Trump's executive order stripping union rights from 1 million federal workers. It basically got rid of collective bargaining and unilaterally canceled contracts for more than 400,000 union workers in the US. And Mike Johnson, who doesn't want Congress to do anything that goes against what Daddy Donald wants, he prevented this bipartisan bill from coming to the floor for weeks and weeks and weeks. So getting this discharge petition for a vote that would overturn Donald Trump's executive order, because remember, executive orders are not laws. But Congress has failed to do their duty all year. Congress could have stopped all of the illegal executive orders that Trump has tried to put in place, but they are abdicating their duty. They are advancing Donald Trump's authoritarian agenda. Congress has not been doing its job, specifically because Mike Johnson is working as hard as he can to render Congress non-functional. So to have two discharge petitions in one day and then this Epstein vote go through the House and the Senate, all of this is a repudiation of Mike Johnson. This is showing these huge cracks in MAGA, that no longer can Johnson make everybody do what he wants. No longer can he whip and corral and control them for Donald Trump. The fact that Republicans are willing to break with Mike Johnson when he has suctioned his lips to Daddy Donald, they've fused together and they're never coming apart. That is not only them condemning Daddy Donald, it is them obligatorily condemning Mike Johnson. And it really shows how significant the fracture is for MAGA. It really shows how significant the fracture is in Congress. And I think, I think that for so many of us, we've been frustrated to see all of the ways that Congress could have checked Donald Trump's power all year, and they have been unwilling to do so, which is why I say that Republicans in Congress are a fully consolidated party of fascism, because they've said, we're not going to do our job, we're abandoning the Constitution, and we'll support whatever Donald wants. But now they're seeing how the tide is turning. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, Congress doesn't care what you think. Congress doesn't care about public opinion. They don't care to hear from their constituents. They do. They do, actually, for any of the pillars of support under the regime, be they academia or media or any corporation or the military or members of Congress. Massive public opposition really matters, because at the end of the day, it is the people who have the power, and we have to make these pillars of support more afraid of us than they are of Donald Trump. And what we saw with these two discharge petitions and what we saw with this vote around the Epstein files is that Trump and Mike Johnson, or Trump via Mike Johnson, no longer have the same ability to threaten and intimidate that we have seen all year. And that is precisely because Republicans in Congress are really, really freaked out about the midterms, especially after what happened in November of this year. They are watching public opposition growing. They saw No King's Day. They see people consistently speaking out and organizing all across this country. They see Americans in Charlotte, in Asheville, in Chicago, in DC, in LA, in Portland, Oregon, refusing to give in, to submit, to cower in the face of what ICE is doing. We see more and more Trump-appointed judges ruling on the side of law and against the regime. And Republicans are scared. Republicans are really realizing that they either can do what Mike Johnson does and go down with Donald Trump, or they can start to peel off and be rats fleeing from a sinking ship, which we've seen for several weeks. Marjorie Taylor Greene doing that in earnest. So I'd love to know what you think. Do you think that Republicans in Congress are going to start to check Donald Trump more and more as they can see which way the wind is blowing and they can see the storm building? They can see Democratic opposition growing. They're starting to realize that their calculus has been very poorly executed, that it's actually the people that they need to be afraid of. and not Donald Trump. Because autocrats are always weak rulers. They only are able to hold on to power if the people lay down, and we're not doing that. We are growing in our resistance. We are organizing, we are strategizing. And I think a lot of members of Congress, they can see the writing on the wall, and it spells bad news for Mike Johnson.